Hey friends, welcome back to Mabe, where we're continuing our Valentine's Day special. As you can clearly tell, I've chosen A Knight's Tale, and that's because this movie has a very special place in my heart. Growing up, we didn't have a ton of movies, but we did own this one, and I remember watching it all the time, and that's because it's timeless. It has a phenomenal cast, it's bursting with charm, and I can't wait to dive in, so let's roll film already. We first have to set the stage for this Knight's Tale. During medieval times, jousting was all the rage, attracting both the rich and poor alike, but only recognized knights could compete. One over-the-hill former champion's time was at an end, but his squire, William Thatcher's time, was only just beginning. We join the late Sir Ector's three squires, the aforementioned William, Roland, and Wat, as they find themselves in a terrible position between rounds at a tournament. Wat pummels Ector, refusing to believe that he's passed on because, as he ravenously points out, they haven't eaten in 3 days, and since their knight was up 3 points to 0 after 2 rounds, all he had to do was stay on his horse and he would have won, then they could have eaten. When a tournament official comes over to see if Sir Ector can continue, Roland starts to share the bad news, but Will thinks fast and assures the man that the knight is on his way, as Wat continues kicking him just feet away. Roland is skeptical of the plan because Will isn't of noble birth, but William is willing to risk it all for a chance to ride as a knight, and Roland eventually folds because, as Watt is demonstrating, they need food. So real quick, I want to set the stage before we get too far. The director, Brian Helgeland, intentionally chose a lot of really popular songs, including We Will Rock You, to capture the spirit of what these games would have been like for those living there at the time. To them, these events were like the rock concerts where you'd get all your buddies together to cheer for a big crowd, but you'd also see royalty and whatnot enjoying the very same show, just with better accommodations naturally. We jump over to the tournament as everyone, including the royals putting on the event, are all doing the iconic stadium chant, We Will Rock You, complete with a stomp stomp clap and all. Once everyone is pumped up, William hides his face behind the gently used armor, and he takes Sir Ector's place in the arena. Once the flags go down, William races and paces, riding on his horse towards his opponent, but seeing as how this is the squire's first time ever jousting, he takes a lance square to the face. Of course, the crowd roars as William nearly gets dismounted, but he barely hangs on, and afterwards, he's able to accept his trophy while remaining disguised because his helmet's visor was fortuitously dented shut from that last hit. The squires would go on to sell the trophy to a traveling merchant, netting them each a whopping 5 gold pieces, but they literally and figuratively find themselves at a crossroad whenever William Thatcher asks their friends' help in changing their destinies. Rather than going back to their lives as peasants, they could pool their gold together, prepare for the next tournament, William would kick ass, and from there they'd be on to glory and riches. William reminds his friends that his skill with a sword is unmatched, so he really only needs to learn jousting, but Roland is still hung up that William isn't of noble birth. However, the Thatcher's son counters that nobles only became nobles by taking with a lance, and this is their chance to do the same. William continues pleading for his friends' help to change their stars, and in a desperate final attempt, he challenges them to forcefully take the coins if they really want them so badly, which they easily overpower him and do, but this clearly means everything to Will, so Roland and Watt agree to start training. The next tournament is in Rowan, and it's only a month away, so they do all manner of exercises to prepare. Like Will said, he clearly dominates with the blade, so they spend a good deal of time on jousting training, and our hero eventually goes from completely whiffing over and over again to slowly hitting his target. When he hit his first target, he was so excited, in fact, that the trio learned pretty quickly why it's probably not a good idea to wear armor while sailing down the river. Now that Mr. Thatcher has gone from zero to hero, we join our party on their way to the next event when, suddenly, a totally naked man walks past them on the road to ruin. Will asks him about his unusual situation, and the man introduces himself as Geoffrey Chaucer, which would be a really big deal today since he's a super famous classic author, but he's not all that famous yet, but more on that later. Keep in mind everything this man says is really fanciful and wordy, but I do like how in Chaucer's introduction, he explains his lack of clothes as an involuntary vow of poverty. We'll see why he specified involuntary soon enough. Chaucer continues to boast about his talents, which are effectively lost on Roland, Will, and Watt, but at one point, he does mention he can make paintings of nobility, which clearly piques William's interest. To keep his cover, Will introduces himself as McLovin. No, I'm just kidding. He says his name is Sir Ulrich von Liechtenstein from Gelderland, but Chaucer can only laugh at the obvious alias, so the group decides to leave this rude, nude dude well enough alone. Fun fact, Gelderland is a province in the Netherlands, and Liechtenstein is the 6th smallest country in the world, and it's located between Switzerland and Austria. Anyways, Geoffrey notices that they're on their way to the tournament in Rowan, and he warns the group that the field is limited to knights with paintings establishing nobility going back at least 4 generations. Then by offering to forge the paintings in exchange for food, clothes, and a ride on the horse, Geoffrey joins the party. Soon they arrive at their next tournament, and Chaucer lives up to his word, and his documents get William, or should I say Sir Ulrich, right into the games. Chaucer barely pays attention to Will thanking him because he can't help but to stare at some gambling circles nearby, but after the poet agrees to be the Knight's Herald, they split up. And side note everybody, if anyone ever tells you they're gonna go see a man about a dog, they're probably up to no good. Sir Ulrich/William is killing some time before his round, so he rides around town while singing about his home of Cheapside. But amidst the crowd, he sees the most breathtaking woman he's ever laid eyes on. She'll remain intentionally nameless for a while, so bear with me, but he follows her on horseback until she meets her lady-in-waiting, Christiana. And after noticeably closing in the distance, William follows them inside a building to court the beautiful lady. Unfortunately for our hero, we get the feeling that this noblewoman gets pursued very regularly, and she doesn't really want to give this wandering warrior the time of day, and oops, Will didn't realize that he had trotted right into a church until a priest yelled at him to leave. Once more, he asks for her name on his way out, but she declares him a hunter, saying he can call her a fox because that's all she is to him. Regardless, Will leaves pleased, and afterwards the priest expects the woman to kiss his ring for being a part of this ruckus, but she mockingly just inspects it instead. I love her. She has a fantastic attitude on that nonsense. Berenice Bejo, who plays Christiana, was originally cast as the noblewoman, but the studio mandated some changes and Shannon Sossaman was cast instead. The director still really wanted to give Berenice Bejo a role, so she was at least still cast as the lady-in-waiting. Oh, and remember how the noblewoman calls Will a hunter? We're going to revisit that way later at the end. During the tournament, William decidedly wins his first round, and he even has to tell his squires to chill to not make it obvious that they're all new at this. But while preparing to jump from jousting to sword fighting, they're accosted by a man in the street. Once they're taken back to the tent to see Chaucer, we're introduced to Simon the Summoner and Peter their partner, who are here to take their pound of flesh from Chaucer for gambling, unless they're paid the 10 gold that he owes. But on the knight's word, they agree to reclothe and release the gambler for payment later. Will is incredibly overdue for his round at the sword fighting arena, so he's thrust right into battle, and that, coupled with his armor being old and messed up, he actually takes a couple of hits before besting his opponent. Then we get the absolutely iconic moment whenever Chaucer attempts to make up for betraying the group by giving the most fiery, passionate speech about Ulrich, and no one cheers, until Roland cues them all in. Yeah! That legendary moment was actually improvised by Mark Addy, who plays Roland. The Czech extras totally missed their cue that they were supposed to cheer for Chaucer's speech, so Addy stuck the landing whenever he started their thunderous cheer. From there, Ulrich more or less just breezes through the rest of the tournament, dominating in the sword fighting arena, but he's still struggling a bit at jousting, and at one point, he actually takes a hit so hard he cracks his armor. They would proceed to be turned away from every single dude blacksmith at the tournament because they all require payment for their services up front, so they're told to ask the only lady blacksmith there, Kate. She initially refuses too, but Will sorta tricks her into taking the order. Will mutters under his breath how the other blacksmith said he was stupid for even asking her for help, and she assumes it's because she's a girl. But Will actually clarifies it's because they said she's terrible with armor and she can only work on horseshoes. And now that it seems like her reputation is on the line, she grabs the breastplate and fixes it right up. Before the final round, William Thatcher watches his crush ignore all the other knights courting her until the villainous Count Adomar joins her with the other nobles to watch the games. He is a renowned jousting champion and military leader, but the girls don't really seem to care about him at all. Even so, Adomar mansplains jousting. 1 point for hitting between the waist and neck, 2 points for hitting the helmet, and 3 points for dismounting the rider. Plus, you get their pink slips. He assures the girls that lances are blunted, but accidents do happen, and he says that he's never been unhorsed, which I'm sure won't come up at all later. William interrupts the conversation from the tournament grounds below to, again, ask for the woman's name, following up that perhaps angels have no names, only beautiful faces. Thank you, wingman Chaucer. But unlike all of the other knights courting her, she actually smiles at Sir Hunter, but still, William leaves with his tail tucked firmly between his legs whenever Count Adomar roasts him in front of all of the other nobles for his old armor. This is my favorite scene of the movie, but admittedly, I can't do it justice in this format, so take my word for it that it's awesome. A rather fancy-looking herald does a pretty good job announcing his liege, Lord Colville, but Chaucer puts him to shame completely. He starts by addressing all of the nobles with a deep bow, and then he fires up the crowd by addressing everyone else not seated in a cushion to deliver a larger-than-life introduction for Sir Ulrich von Liechtenstein. Paul Bettany, who plays Chaucer, is based on the real Geoffrey Chaucer who wrote the Canterbury Tales, and there's actually a missing year in his history which is suggested to be this Knight's Tale at the end of the movie. But Paul said he was inspired by the time John Lennon was playing in front of the Queen, and he famously said, "All the people in the cheap seats, clap your hands. Everybody else, just rattle your jewelry." The director said Chaucer was designed to sound like a boxing promoter, and Paul Bettany said he wanted to seem like he was appealing to the masses. He also said something that really resonated with me. Quote, "This movie is about people's dreams, and that's what makes it so universal." End quote. I 100% agree. Perhaps friends really can come together and change their stars. As Adomar watches William clash with Colville, he comments how Colville's form is perfect, but he's never heard of him before. Meanwhile, Ulrich's style is fearless. Between rounds, Colville winces as he tells Will he's too hurt to continue. But he's never not finished a match, so he's asking for mercy in order to keep his honor. So instead of the two knights clashing again, they both raise their lances in mutual respect, and Colville withdraws. But Adomar can't believe Ulrich didn't finish off his wounded opponent. The noblewoman takes notice that Ulrich is showing mercy, even if Adomar discounts it as a weakness. Will spends the rest of his night feeling lovesick over his nameless crush, so Roland warns him that love is a distraction. You have to stay dedicated if you want to win. Elsewhere, Christiana tells her lady that Adomar intends to win for her, but she dismisses him, saying he wins all the time and he does it for himself. Whenever Christiana suggestively asks if she'd have Ulrich win for her, she cheeses hard, saying no, but she ponders how he's the only one who hasn't dedicated winning this tournament to her, and she longs for him to win her heart instead. Before William and Adomar go head-to-head in the finals, Christiana visits the party to first give Ulrich, Will, a token to wear from her lady, and second, to reveal that her lady's name is Jocelyn. And it's fast, but I love the moment whenever Chaucer literally lifts Roland's jaw, and then Roland tells Will to concentrate. Oh man, and I'm so glad I could just call her Jocelyn. It's annoying to tiptoe around that for so long. Sorry about that. The final round is quick, but intense. They tie in their first exchange. Ulrich actually gets ahead by a point in the second exchange, but for their third bout, Adomar hits William's head so hard he's knocked back into childhood. He recalls a happier time whenever he was just a boy climbing a pillory so that he and his dad could watch the knights parade through London. When young Will declares that he'll be a knight someday, the prisoner bursts out laughing that a Thatcher's son is more likely to change the stars than become a knight, but his dad promises that it can be done if a man believes enough. Back to the present day, William is still awarded for the sword fighting tournament, but he has to watch as Adomar is declared tournament champion for jousting. William promises he'll win their next encounter, but Adomar drops the pretentious, "You have been weighed, measured, and found wanting" line. Ouch. And to the party's chagrin, the Count definitely got under his skin because Will stomps off declaring that he's done with sword fighting. It's tournament champion or nothing. Our hero uses part of his winnings to pay off Chaucer's debt with Simon the Summoner and Peter the Partner, but before they depart, the writer promises his revenge on them will be timeless, as he intends to, quote, eviscerate them in his writing. Which he totally does, because Simon the Summoner and Peter the Partner are both characters in the Canterbury Tales. And while we're on the subject, the first chapter in that epic classic is The Knight's Tale. Afterwards, Kate points out how William's armor was made for somebody else, but she offers to make him some incredible armor, if they take her to see Paris. But they're only just skating by, so the knight declines the tempting offer and settles his debt with her using more of his winnings. Then William wants to just hurry up and leave so he can start practicing instead of attending tonight's dance like Chaucer suggested, but then Christiana appears to inquire about what Ulrich will be wearing tonight, so her lady Jocelyn can match him. Roland is so terrible under pressure, so he answers for William saying, "Green with a shade of, green." But after Christiana leaves, William starts to panic, but not because of the dumb colors, but because he can't actually dance. And for the official record, since he can't dance, he's actually no friend of mine, but we'll keep going. Chaucer does his very best to teach our squire turned knight how to dance, but this ongoing feud he has with Wat seems to keep getting in the way. Kate drops by again as this disaster is unfolding, and she turns out to be their saving grace. She initially declines Will, but he asks super nicely, so she properly teaches our hero how to dance. Okay, I guess we can be friends now. William, or Ulrich von Liechtenstein from Gelderland in this case, meets up with Jocelyn at the dance, and quick shout out to Zoology Guy on Reddit for pointing out that Jocelyn seemingly painted under her eye to match the black eye that Christiana saw Will with earlier after the final round. Before all the festivities, Will gets a chance to eloquently pour his heart out to Jocelyn, but the tender moment gets ruined whenever our hero's worst fears come true. Adomar requests to see a dance from Gelderland, and it's apparent Ulrich is just making stuff up as he goes. But then the Count has to jealously watch as Jocelyn joins in on the demonstration, and her improvisation turns it into a really fun dance that everyone enjoys. How the dance changes from a boring medieval song to David Bowie's Golden Years is iconic. but it was Heath Ledger that suggested the song because it was originally going to be Get Down Tonight by Casey and the Sunshine Band. He confidently said that it has the same tempo, it'll work, so they tried out both and ultimately went with Heath Ledger's suggestion. Also, speaking of music, in the making of, the director Brian Helgeland shared how Shannon Sossman, who plays Jocelyn, was working as a DJ at Gwyneth Paltrow's brother's birthday party whenever the casting director met her, set up a meeting for her to read lines with Heath Ledger, and everybody loved her. And while the party was going on, Kate was hard at work finishing her new armor design to prove to Will that her work is superior. However, all of the men just wave it off after seeing how sleek and flexible it was. But after Kate has the knight actually tested out, he takes a devastating blow which he could barely feel. Welcome aboard, Kate. Sorry insurance doesn't exist yet. The next tournament is held in France at Lagny-sur-Marne or something like that. But right off the bat, we see how unorthodox Will's new armor is whenever he's the laughingstock of all the other knights, up until he effortlessly mounts his horse to prepare for his next foe. Then Roland and Watt share how he's overly taxing his people while living lavishly himself, so our hero furiously charges towards him, and the two squires shrug, hoping that all that crap they just said was true, but either way, Ulrich obliterates the guy so hard that even his horse falls over. Soon after, Count Adomar is up against Lord Colville, who Will showed mercy against at the last tournament, and we're just gonna ignore how Adomar's herald describes him as a defender of his enormous manhood, and instead move on to how Adomar abruptly withdraws. Roland astutely points out that that withdrawal can only mean royalty, so Chaucer leaves to see what he can find out before Will has to face Colville again soon. And just before the rematch between Sir Ulrich von Liechtenstein and Lord Colville, Chaucer rushes over begging Will to stand down because he's discovered Colville is actually Edward, the Black Prince of Wales and the future King of England. Side note, people only started referring to him as the Black Prince a couple hundred years later to differentiate him from the other Prince Edwards. But either way, William doesn't care about the politics behind anything. His purpose is to be a knight, so he's gonna charge in anyways. A smile forces across Colville, or Edward's face, whenever he sees Ulrich is going to face him, so he joyously meets his opponent in the arena, resulting in a draw once again. During the customary post-match GG session, William thanks Edward by name for the match, and the prince greatly respects Ulrich, or William, for knowingly competing against him, both of them agreeing that withdrawing just isn't in their blood. William would go on to become the tournament champion, but even though the crowd is cheering, Ulrich, Ulrich, he's pissed because he knows he only beat Adomar today because he withdrew against Edward. Then Jocelyn jaunts over hoping to coordinate outfits for tonight's dance in person, and Chaucer can tell Will is still fuming about his hollow victory, so he quickly tries to cool his liege's temper before he says something stupid. And Will does just that. He says something stupid, getting fed up with all of the parties, and he stomps off angry because he wasn't able to rematch his rival, Adomar. The stunts and jousting we see in this movie are all practically done. The stunt director conceded that, yeah, they were using really splintery balsa wood, hollowed out with uncooked pasta for the lances, but the actors were really jousting, and in some cases, they were getting yanked or dead-manned off of a horse with a wire, or better yet, being dragged away by a horse. Very well done by the stunt crew, for real. The next tournament is in Bordeaux, France, where William's mood sours even further. First because Jocelyn is on a hiatus from attending events, and second because Adomar was called back to the war by Prince Edward. Adomar himself also gets pissed off while he's away at war, whenever his herald shows him how Ulrich has been winning absolutely everything in his absence, and remember that, we're going to revisit it later. Now, our hero isn't a total rube, so he catches on pretty quick that Jocelyn is now avoiding him, so one night, while the party's all gathered together, he asks Chaucer to help him write a letter to win Jocelyn back. Will's first suggestions are rather elementary because he can't quite find the words to say what he feels, but the others aren't much better, especially Watt and Roland, who are completely juvenile, suggesting that he compliments her breasts. Classic, guys, classic. However, once William compares her beauty to that of the sun, it inspires the rest of the party to draw from their own personal experiences with love to collectively weave together a truly romantic letter. Signed, The Knight of Your Heart. Watt personally delivers the message to Jocelyn, and by the end of the letter, she's in tears, eagerly excited to see her love again in France. Watt hurries back to Will and the others in France, where he'd share the great news and give his master a message from Jocelyn, which was a kiss square on the mouth. Unlike the messenger, Watt, Will is totally unbothered by the kiss, and he's just elated to have won Jocelyn back over. Way to go, big guy. We then pick up with the whole party, except for William, on a side quest at a bar, where they're goaded by some Frenchmen. After they consider Adomar as once again gone from the event, and Jocelyn will be there to encourage William, Roland agrees to let Chaucer bet all of their money on William to win the whole tournament. Back to the main quest, William meets with Jocelyn at a church where she wants to hear more of his romantic side, but William can't conjure such poetry on the spot in person. Nevertheless, He wants to know how to prove his love to her, and she tells him to do the impossible. Instead of winning for, frankly, his own reputation, he is to lose on purpose for her. But our hero snaps, he will not lose. I'll say it again, I love Jocelyn's character. That is such a smart dilemma to put him in. However, after another one of Chaucer's rousing openers for Will, Jocelyn watches as the impossible becomes possible in front of her very eyes. The great Ulrich von Liechtenstein is actually losing on purpose. Of course, he doesn't know his team went on a side quest to make that crazy bet, so they lose their minds as he gets destroyed round after round, hit after hit. William explained to his crew why he was losing, and between rounds, while he's recovering from all of these devastating hits, he maintains that it's still worth it. However, Christiana drops by to flip the script, saying if he loves Jocelyn, he will win this tournament. Then after the hardest eye roll in the 14th century, William does win the whole event. And here's my favorite line in the whole movie. Wat tells Chaucer that he doesn't understand women, but Chaucer quips, neither does he, but they understand us. Well said, Jeff, well said. Later that evening, after raking in a pile of gold from their risky bet with a Frenchman, Chaucer sees Jocelyn sneaking into William's tent. Once inside, Jocelyn approaches our battered and bruised hero, but first she has one more test of sorts for him. She asks if what Christina said about his friends calling him William is true, and he confirms it. Delighted, the noblewoman assures that she doesn't care what his name is, so long as they're together. And they both pretty slick here. Jocelyn blames herself for his current pain, but William says his father taught him to take the good with the bad. So she leans in really close, so she can be responsible for the good too. So I wondered why there were no pews in the churches, so I looked it up, and according to many sources, they didn't get widely used until the 1400s, and this movie takes place during the 1300s. Also, during an argument at the French bar, the patrons say the Pope is French, so that date is specific to the Avignon, sorry if I mispronounced that, the Avignon papacy, between 1309 and 1376. Shout out to the Redditor Aerosemitic for this insight, but that makes the timeline a little weird that Will is called Quasimodo by the French earlier because that story wouldn't exist until roughly 500 years later in 1831. Great catch. The most prestigious event of the year is next, and it takes our party to the World Championships in London. As they're ferried across a river, the group reminisces about how long they've been away from their collective home, but none of them have been gone even half as long as William, who's at 12 years. William thinks back to that fateful day all those years ago, how he and his dad traveled with this very same ferryman to meet with Sir Ector about a 7-year-long apprenticeship. Sir Ector agreed to have the boy on as a squire, so the Thatcher has to say goodbye to his son, in hopes that William might have a better life than being a simple Thatcher could ever provide. However, the scared new squire is unsure how to find his way home, but before his dad sails too far down the river, he shouts for him to simply follow his feet. Back in the modern day, Ulrich and his squires are marching in a parade with his fellow knights when adoring fans start chanting Ulrich. As William's mind is flooding with memories of his old home, he looks over at a kid on the same pillory that he climbed as a child, and for a moment, William sees his younger self waving back at him. During the march, Chaucer gives Will the great news that Adomar will be competing again at last, and I caught something I never really picked up on before. Will suspects that the Count took a break from war, but Chaucer corrects that Prince Edward actually disbanded his army due to Adomar pillaging towns. I think it's fair to assume that he intentionally went full villain mode after learning how Ulrich had been raking in all of his glory while he was away, so now he can make sure to have that rematch and reclaim all of that glory. And speaking of the devil, Adomar lines up with William in the parade, so our hero reminds the slimy Count that he'll be looking up at him from the ground after he loses their next match. But the villain is actually here to deliver some distressing news. And keep in mind, arrangements like this were very different in the Middle Ages, so Adomar says he's already started discussions with Jocelyn's father about marrying her. On the IGC Pod channel, Rufus Sewell, who plays Adomar, shared how this movie was really his only major hit that he had been in, so in so many words, he described how it was really challenging for his career overall. He said that after this, he was repeatedly offered parts that were basically the same role in worse movies, and I thought this was insightful. He explained that people who cast by saying, "Let's get the guy from that," aren't of the highest stripe, saying they're a little dumb. So he said that to avoid being typecasted, he opted for unemployment and taking really small roles. Later, Adomar watches as his rival continues to dominate in the arena, and one of the Count's cohorts even warns that Ulrich is unbeatable with a lance, so that means it's time to play dirty, of course. William has some downtime, so he kind of wanders his way into his old stomping grounds in Cheapside, but noticeably, there's someone trailing inconspicuously in the distance. William Thatcher soon finds a starstruck little fan who becomes elated when her hero shares his secret that he was really born here, not Gelderland. Then he asks if his father, John Thatcher, is still around, and she first tells him the good news that he does still live here, but she also shares the bad news that even though he's gone blind, people often see him staring out the window. Oh, and FYI, a Thatcher is like a roof repairman. Just a stone's throw from that conversation, the blind Thatcher is working on a net whenever he hears what he assumes is an impatient customer, so he tells him to return later. However, something feels different about this man, and his silence would speak volumes. The Thatcher is surprised whenever the man finally introduces himself as the renowned Ulrich, but he's nearly floored whenever he says he has word from his son. Tears begin to swell in the old man's eyes after the knight says that he's changed his stars, but to be sure, the Thatcher harkens back to his last meeting with his son and asks the knight if he's followed his feet home. When Will confirms that he has, the two are overcome with joy and they embrace in a long overdue hug. As the night goes on, William ironically sees a leak in his father's roof and he decides that isn't a good look for a Thatcher, so he lives up to his own surname and fixes it right away. But unbeknownst to Will, she followed him to this seemingly random commoner's home, so she told Adomar, and he was right outside at the perfect time to see William fixing the roof. Oh man, that can't be good. But right after this scene, there's a shot of London which they used about a $500,000 model on, but in keeping with this movie's intentionally anachronistic style, you can clearly see a Ferris wheel called the London Eye visible in the distance. This one is admittedly tragic since Heath Ledger passed away in 2007, but he shared that the rehearsals for this movie were basically the fellas going out drinking and becoming friends. And his co-stars praised his incredible talent at such a young age of 21, and Heath himself was humble, sharing that he had been acting since he was just 10 years old in an amateur theater, and somehow he had managed to change his own stars and end up in Hollywood. Man, that's so tragic. His Joker is still definitely my favorite performance of all time. Before the next event, William is over the moon telling Roland and Kate about his father when Jocelyn and Chaucer approach looking totally depressed, and they tell William how Adomar followed him last night and now the jig is up. Knowing full well they don't exist, the officials are demanding to see William, not Ulrich's papers, or else he'll be locked away. Everyone, especially Jocelyn, wants him to run to see another day of freedom, so she reminds him that she doesn't care what his status is. But our hero vehemently rejects his friend's pleas, declaring that he is a knight and he will not run. I'm kind of curious what you guys think about this decision because me and my wife are split. I think it's really cool that he has this calling he's following no matter what, but she thinks it's a little dumb he didn't go off with his friends and Jocelyn. What do you guys think? Sorry, I digress. Knowing full well what is about to happen, William marches into the arena to compete against Adomar, but as foretold, he's arrested on the spot and locked away. The Count visits the prisoner later that day, telling William again that he had been weighed, measured, and been found wanting, but our hero's resolve is unshakable and he remains silent even while Adomar gets a bunch of cheap shots in. Shortly after, the knight finds himself shackled in the very pillory that he climbed as a child, and speaking of, the boy that he saw as his younger self was the first to run out from the crowd and slap him. At this point, William's party emerges from the ravenous crowd ready to defend their defeated friend, but they can only do so much. Suddenly, hooded figures reveal themselves from the crowd, and amongst them is Prince Edward, aka Lord Colville. He leans over William, finding it ironic that they both failed to hide who they are. The prince observes how William's friends are nobly defending him, and he also recalls the honor that Will displayed in their previous exchanges, so Prince Edward surprises everyone by declaring William a noble of an ancient bloodline. To repay all of the kindnesses that Ulrich showed Colville, he's knighted right here in front of all of these people, and the prince warns William that he better hurry if he still plans on getting his rematch against the Count in the finals. While the two rivals are saddling up in the arena, Adomar's herald does his very best to emulate Chaucer's style, but more importantly, Adomar himself broke off the lance stopper that blunts a lance, hoping to end William in their next round. And I hate to be so nitpicky, but you can totally see the lance stopper is still attached before each hit, so I think they're saying they just changed his material for something that would break really easily. After their first terrifying exchange, Adomar gains a point because he, predictably, buried his lance into William, piercing his armor with a catastrophic blow. Not wanting to be disqualified, Sir William tells Roland to not get the surgeon, but he asks for help right there instead. Also, the party can clearly see that Edward had tampered with his lance, so now they're ready to see him get hit so hard that he just forgets his childhood. Sadly, after William loses another point by taking a crushing blow to the chest, he's subjected to more of the Count's usual trash-talking, but Will doubles his resolve once he sees his father and Jocelyn are cheering for him in the stands above. Things are looking bleak though, because as Roland states, Will has to either dismount or kill Adomar to make the 3-point comeback. And while preparing for the final, decisive round, Sir William of Cheapside totally leans into his fearless style by shirking his armor to remain unhindered, and by ordering Watt to strap the lance to his arm because it's become too painful to hold. Chaucer sees that the round is about ready to start, but he realizes that his friend needs a few more moments to prepare, so the man of the people gives the people exactly what they want. Another epic introduction for their all-time favorite knight. However, instead of exaggerated tales, the crowd roars after hearing about Sir William Thatcher and learning that he's one of their very own from Cheapside. Between the booming chants for William, Wat tells his friend that his father certainly heard his son is now Sir William Thatcher. Then William takes a moment to collect himself before he summons the rest of his strength to charge into battle at least one final time, as our hero races towards what could be his very own end. He honors his father by shouting the name that he gave him, and then William does what no other challenger has done before. He knocks the great Count Adomar off of his horse, and in doing so, he wins the championship. Right after the final blow, there's a glorious moment of cosmic, or perhaps divine justice, whenever the defeated Count is falling to the ground. As promised, from his back, Adomar looks up at William and all of his friends looking down on him, repeating that he has been weighed, measured, and been found wanting. Then once time snaps back into motion, the crowd erupts louder than ever before for our hero, Sir William Thatcher. John is overcome with joy as he witnesses his son change his stars and know that the sacrifice that he had made 12 years ago was worth it after all. As we wrap this adventure up, it's here that Chaucer decides he's going to write about their journey, but more importantly, Jocelyn runs down from the stands so that she could passionately kiss the knight of her heart. As they embrace, stars fill the sky behind them, and amongst them is Orion the Hunter, which I feel is a very clever way to remind the audience just how far Sir William has come in this beloved Knight's Tale. That is a wrap on A Knight's Tale. Thank you so much for joining me for our very special Valentine's Day episodes, and let me know which one you liked more, this or Blade. And if you didn't catch Blade, go back and check out last week's episode because it's my wife's favorite and it had a ton of trivia. But for those that hit the like buttons down below, I'll see you next week, and until then, y'all be good. And I don't usually say this or plug this hard, but I tried really hard on this week and last week, so I'd really appreciate any support. Thank you so much. Hey, you made it to the end. Remember, if you want to revisit any more of your favorite movies, check the links on screen, but otherwise, subscribe and I'll catch you for a new breakdown next week. Thanks.